This is Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and the speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, it's another edition of the Speaking of Speaking podcast. And man, we've had some really cool opportunities to have some guests on these podcasts over the last year and a half. And no exception today with a guy who is an actor, a musician, a director, like a lot of people. He's sidelined right now, but man, he has a host of credentials to his name, including he spent some time touring with Shania Twain back in 2015. You can see him in a number of different movies in different capacities. No, it's not Danny DeVito. He wasn't the one that was touring with Shania Twain back in 2015, but it was Wes Mack. Wes, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
It was a pleasure. I have never, ever been compared in any way to Danny DeVito. I like even being listed alongside him.
I had to think of somebody, and that's the first name that popped in my head. Don't know why. I was just watching JFK the other day, so maybe that's why.
That'll do it.
In the last episode, we talked about how do you still engage your audience through speaking when you can't get on stage and speak, because obviously there are no stages to speak on right now. They're closed up. And same for musicians. Musicians are sidelined. They aren't going out and touring and performing, Wes, obviously, as you know. And in the acting world, there's not a lot going on in that area right now too. So what are some of the things that you're doing or that you should be doing to stay relevant regardless of the climate in business and regardless of what's going on in the world?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, totally on point. I think, when we were chatting a little before, I mentioned this, but to reiterate, I think one of the big things is to really actually embrace what's going on right now, and as opposed to coming at this from like, okay, well, I had this agenda beforehand, and I'm just going to try and plow through and keep on message of what I was doing before. I think you end up kind of coming off out of step. And with like just because everybody's dealing with the same thing right now, I think you have to embrace this. Like the thing I said, I saw a car ad that connected with me, in my opinion. It was a bunch of just empty streets, empty roads, no car driving along them. At the end, it said like, we're going to have a lot of catching up to do when this is done, and we'll be there for you. And it's a simple offering. And to me, it made me pay attention, because I was like, oh, cool. This is like an interesting slant on something I've seen before. It still looks like a car ad. It still is on their brand, but it like embraces the tone of what's happening right now. And I've seen, simpler versions of this, I think, where it was like, the new drive to work. And it was like someone on a cell phone, like going from their bedroom to the kitchen to like, cause they're working from home. And I was like, cool, that's a slant on it. I think you have to be embracing that and then factoring in, whatever your own brand is. I'm at my cabin during this, and I've been assembling my recording studio. So it's been showing the pieces that I've been putting together in that. And, kind of artsy photography around it, because that's on with what I do. But that's it embraces the fact that I'm in this place that I've spoken about a bunch, that I love, but that I'm here in a modified situation and still doing my thing and finding a way to do it. So I think it's just like finding a way that's comfortable for you to comment on what's happening and to share a little of your own experience.
You have the luxury of working from home quite often as a writer, as an artist. Obviously, you spend time in recording studios and on the road when you're performing, and obviously in Hollywood sets and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. One of the things, though, that's very interesting is I think that some people are almost panicked because they don't know what to do, because it is a new normal for them. Is there anything that you're doing differently to engage your audience that maybe you weren't doing before, that you've realized, oh, you know what, maybe I should try this? So for example, I love to cook. I know you're all the way out north of Vancouver, but you're all the way out in BC. I can't even in a normal circumstance invite you for dinner, but I love to cook. One of the things I've noticed is that I've been engaging my audience rather than just with the professional, here's my business video, here's my hard sell, buy my product. I've been doing videos about me cooking. Cool. And they've actually gained some traction.
I think that's right on, honestly, because I think that's more just personal. And I feel like I think the thing is being sensitive to the fact that, like, yeah, people are like kind of panicked right now. If you spend 10 minutes reading the news, you will probably be scared or angry or sad about something going on with this. So I think it's kind of owning that. The thing about most people's brand is that it's tied to a human somewhere along the lines. And so that human connection never loses validity. I think the way to lose that human connection is to ignore that everyone's stuck in their house right now and having to cook a lot of meals. So why would that not be relatable? Instead, if you're just trying to like ramrod home like a sales pitch, I think it just feels tone deaf right now. Again, one of the weirder things for me is that this doesn't feel that strange. And that's almost the double take I have to keep doing. I feel strange about the state of the world, but like I work from home a huge chunk of the time. And yes, I'm not on set or auditioning right now, and I'm not in the studio, and I'm not on tour. But I happen to be at a point in an album cycle, like I put out my album in October. So I was probably not going to be doing a ton of that stuff right now anyways. Like I'm working on my third album. I think maybe the thing I've tried to factor in a little is just like maybe a little more reassurance, and a little more like, I think I'm a little more inclined towards like social and even governmental commentary than I normally would be. I have a degree in political science. I don't beat home my political views in any way in my like social media presence. I don't tend to, that's not really like something I bring into my brand. I bring that, that's part of my life. I've never felt so connected to the world before. Like we're really all in this thing together. One of my best friends texted that to me the other day. He's like, I don't think I've ever felt this sort of sense of shared collaborative consciousness where it's like everyone is in this together right now. And so I think it's just like getting on board with that and realizing that like there's a lot of really scared people out there. And
is there anything different that you're doing with your brand to make it more humanized? I mean, your brand is very human to begin with, but is there anything else that you're doing, to put it more on a human level than it maybe already is?
I don't think it's really changed too much in this. If anything, I feel like some of what this has done though is I think I'm maybe a little less present during all of this, and that's a conscious choice I've made. I feel like this is an opportunity in some ways for me to be like, okay, I am locked down right now, but there's a lot of work that I can be doing that maybe isn't necessarily social media work. Like I personally love coming at social media from a perspective of when I have a piece of art that I'm really excited about, that's when I want to be on social media, because then for me, it's not look at me. It's like, look at this thing that I made that I'm really excited about. I'm associated with it. I am the brand indeed, but like, this is the thing. This feels like a good opportunity really for, I think many businesses could look at this as like, okay, maybe if you can't engage in all the ways you want to, what's the most effective use of your time? Because sometimes you'd kill to have some time to just like work on the groundwork of stuff of like, for me as a musician, you can't go and do a tour and a radio tour and a promotional and merch and music video until you have songs, until you have the core recordings. So that's like the core that it has to come back to. For film, it's like coming back to like the script and the core idea. So like going down to those little seeds. So it's like, cool, maybe right now, rather than focusing on like half measures of engaging on social media in a time when I can't really do exactly what I want to do, I'm going to go back to those things that I would normally kill to have the time to work hard on them so that knowing like in the future, this will end and I'll be able to take those things and be like, sweet, now I can run with the ball because I spent the time to make it.
I think you make a very good point that and this is obviously by choice, that you've decided to not press pause, but not be as engaged in social media as maybe a lot of other people are. Mm-hmm. But it's keeping you on the level, and it's allowing you to focus on some of those other things. This is probably, and I think you'd agree with me, this is a great opportunity for people, rather than to panic and knee-jerk react and maybe send something out about their brand that isn't really reflective of their brand. It's a great time to pause and reflect on what is important to their brand, whether it's, once we're out of this thing, my marketing is going to be different, or I'm going to start a podcast, or I'm going to whatever it is, as opposed to, oh my goodness, I have all this time, I have to do a Facebook post to let people know I'm still there.
I think that's a huge thing right now, which I initially in the first few weeks really felt this huge anxiety of like, I had never gone on Instagram so many times where people were doing live videos. It was just like every time I went on, there was 30 live videos ongoing. And I get it. It's like you have time. So a lot of people were playing songs from home and doing interviews with each other. And I like initially was like, oh my God, I've got to get on top of it. And I stopped at some point. I'm like, I'm having that knee-jerk reaction where I'm like, wait, I want to go to the party because it looks like everybody's at the party. I'm like, hang on, do I actually need to be there right now? I don't have an album out right now. I'm not looking to push something right now. Like in this moment, I'm like, oh, cool. What I actually maybe need to do is withdraw a little bit and be like, cool, I'll still stay engaged and let people know on like what I'm up to. And I think that's important to like a brand is, you know, you keep that recognition that's the car company putting out the ad that has no cars on the road. It still reminds you that like, oh yeah, they're still there. That's still a thing. But I don't like coming at social media from the perspective, what's a great social media idea? I like to go from like, what's the main thing I'm working on and how does that grow social media ideas out of it? Everything is going to evolve from that. And that's where I delineate myself from like, I am not, in my opinion, a social media personality. I'm not a vlogger. There are people who make a great business out of doing that. That's not my full-time job. My full-time job is being an actor, a musician, a writer, director, producer. I do all those things. It's already way too many full-time jobs. If I try to like on top of that, pretend that I am like an influencer first, it feels out of alignment for me on like a psychological level, and I'm just not good at it. Like that's not my thing. I think I'll look out of step with myself. Whereas for me, this is a cool opportunity. Like, all right, yeah, we're gonna work on a bunch of the core stuff because I'm serious. Like the sheer number of times when like during a year normally I'm like, oh my God, I wish I just had the time to finish all these songs. If I could finish all these songs, I have all these opportunities to like, you know, to use them and it's like, cool, why don't I do that?
You make a very interesting point, Wes, when you're talking about the example of the car company that's shifted how they're engaging people. So for you, you're still engaged with people. People still know who you are. So I think one of the things that you've done very well is kept everything together. And you've eliminated that FOMO, that fear of missing out, whereas a lot of people haven't. They've embraced the fear and gone, oh my goodness, I have to do something. So this has been very enlightening, having you share with me today about where you're at with things right now. If you had one message that you could share, maybe with entrepreneurs they're maybe in that zone where they're not panicking, but they just don't know what to do next, what would you say to them?
I think the biggest thing is your job right now is to stay at home and not get people sick. If you do that during this time, you've actually already succeeded. I think there is this huge fear that exists in a vacuum of just like, oh my God, I have all this time. And if this time ends and I haven't used it well, I'm going to be in big trouble. But the reality is, like for most people, like for most entrepreneurs, you're going to be fine. Like the world will return and you will still have the opportunity to chase your dreams and do everything you want. I just don't think humans are actually all that well wired to deal with how connected we are at this point. I think our sheer adrenal glands, the way they work, you release like fear chemicals in your body, and that's designed to help you outrun a tiger or a dinosaur or something. Like that's the idea behind it. It's really helpful when there's a pressing emergent threat going to hurt you. Problem with being aware of what every human you've ever met and many humans you've never met, what they're doing at all times is I feel like you give yourself little micro doses of that. Somewhere in the back of your head, they're getting ahead and it's tricking your brain into thinking the tiger is getting closer. And I think the biggest favor you can do to yourself in this is to try to like actively deprogram yourself a little bit on that, to be like, I'm not falling behind. If I don't write Shakespeare during this, if I don't revise my business plan, if I don't have it all figured out at the end of this, welcome to being a human, because that's what most people are going to come out of this with. I doubt most people will have used this time to like solve the big thing. I think taking care of yourself as well as you can is a huge part of this, because like being isolated in your house and taking away your friends and all that, it's doing hard things to people's mental health that I don't even think we're fully aware of yet. So I think that's a big part of it. In terms of your brand, like, yeah, it's do what feels comfortable and do what feels, I think, organic. Like if you want to do something, if you're finding yourself cooking one day and you want to do a little video about it, like I was watching Castaway last night and I was like, oh my God, this is the ultimate social distancing video. So I took a couple of like videos within it of him eating food very slowly, him literally just sitting there and watching something for 15 seconds, and then him freaking out when he created fire and being really happy about it. This is what everyone's going through right now. We're all eating slowly, staring at the wall, and getting really weirdly excited over small things. And I was like, okay, this is funny.
If I can paraphrase it, stop, look, listen, kind of like we're told when we're kids to cross the street, stop, look, listen. We're all doing this in our lives now. Stop, look, listen, and just embrace the moment.
Yeah, because
Really.
like when's this gonna happen again? Like, how often do you get told to, like, the sheer number of times people will joke like, oh, I wish I could just cancel all my plans and just watch Netflix all week. And it's like, guess what? You are being asked to do that. The government has told you to do that. If I told you a year ago that, like, hey, the government's gonna force you to stay home and watch Netflix for half a year, people would have dismissed it, and a lot of people would have been like, oh yeah, if only, I wish. Now you got it.
My guest today has been Wes Mack, actor, musician, director. Wes, how can people connect with you? What's your website?
If you go to wesmackmusic.com, that's probably the one I'm on the most, and then social media wise, everywhere, the handle at Wes Mack Music.
All right, Wes, it's been a pleasure getting caught up with you, and enjoy self-isolation at the cabin. I've seen pictures of it, and I wish I could post a picture in this podcast because I think people would probably want to join you, but then we're not
doing the thing.
Physical distancing at that point. So anyways, Wes, thanks so much for taking the time today. And don't forget, if you ever have a question on anything on the podcast, drop me a line. It's askcarl@carlspeaks.ca. Until next time, it's Carl Richards. Get out there and own the platform.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca. And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.